Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Kulvukis. I'm the protopsaltis at St. Demetrius Greek Orthodox Church in Seattle, Washington. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about my time at the Liturgical Arts Academy in South Carolina and about some of the takeaways that I think might be helpful for some of you to hear who are learning how to chant.
Lord, I have cried unto thee.
Now, let's talk about what the Liturgical Art Academy is. So basically, this is a week-long retreat for both iconographers and chanters to work on their craft with some professional teachers. So the teachers that were there at the academy that were teaching for chant were John Michael Boyer, Sam Heron, and Fotini Dani Robinson, some of the most prominent chanters here in the States. And just a little bit about how the schedule worked there. We would wake up every morning. We had a service at 7 a.m. Sometimes it would be Orthros, sometimes it would be liturgy. It just depended on the day. And then we would break out into groups based on levels, intermediate, advanced, and master levels of chanters. And we would go with our different teachers, and we would have chant workshops basically for the entire day. And then after that, we had of course had a break for lunch, continued our chant workshops, and at the end of the day, we would finish with another service, sometimes Paraklesis, sometimes Vespers, depending on the day. And all of these services were student-led, except for a couple of them. We did have a vigil for the prophet Samuel. That was a beautiful experience, but the choirs, of course, were led by John Boy on the left choir and Sam Heron on the right choir. And we also had a couple other services at the beginning of the week that were led by the instructors and at the end of the week. But mostly they were student run. So that was a big benefit of this. We got to run services with an antiphonal choir with using only books, without using any iPads, without using any digital chant sound resources. So it was kind of like you were kind of thrown into the deep end. It was actually quite good. Because that's how they do it in Greece, right? And that's how they do it traditionally. So it's good to have that experience. And so I just wanted to share some of my main educational takeaways that I had from this conference that you can't necessarily learn by taking chant lessons. It's things that are aside from how to sing the tones, how to use your voice properly, all that. Just kind of things about how to be a chanter and what being a chanter in America means, that I think might be helpful for some of you to hear, because they certainly were helpful for me, so I want to pass on the information. So the first takeaway that I had that I think is really important is Sam Heron spent a lot of the first day that we were there talking about what our job is as chanters in the Greek Orthodox Church, or any Orthodox Church in America, and that is to cultivate a sense of spiritual worship for the people who are attending the services, cultivate that spiritual atmosphere. And in America, we've kind of come to a place where we can be a bit complacent as far as making mistakes in the services go. So, for example, if somebody's reading a psalm and they're maybe tripping up on the words, they're not the best reader, maybe they're a bit too fast, maybe they're a bit too slow, they haven't learned how to read properly out loud and read the psalms for services. Maybe that's something they need to work on before they start doing it in the services, instead of just having them do it in the services even though it can be a little bit detracting from the spiritual experience of the people there. Or maybe if somebody wants to chant a hymn, but they're not quite experienced enough yet, or they don't know the hymn, or they don't know the prosomion, instead of saying, yes, you can do it, even though you might trip up a few times, even though you might not be exactly sure what to do, instead, work with that person and only let them do that when they're ready to do it, just so you're not detracting from that spiritual experience. Because when you listen to chanters in Greece chant, especially the masters, especially Panayotis Neochoritis, Chasanidis, Babazalakis, these people, they're not making those kinds of mistakes. The whole service is curated in a way where it's beautiful. It is very prayerful. And that is the kind of thing that we as chanters want to be able to cultivate for our congregations as well. And so from that, I think that one of my main takeaways was It's okay to hold yourself and your chant stand, if you're a protopsaltis, to a higher standard during the services. You don't need to have everybody that's up there do something solo, especially if they're not ready. You can, of course, work with them on the side until they're ready to do that, and you should, because as protopsaltis, one of your jobs, in my opinion, is to be able to welcome people to the chant stand. If someone wants to be up there, to help them feel comfortable, to help them feel ready, and if doing a solo is something they want to do, it's your job to help them get to the level where they can do that confidently and also in a way that is correct, right? That adds to the spiritualness of the service. But nobody is owed that. And sometimes I think that we feel like we owe people a reading, or we owe people a verse to chant, or we owe someone a prosomion. When really, if it is detracting from the spiritualness of the service, you can say to that person, of course, not to shame them and not to make them feel less than you, but to help them become a better chanter, right? You can say to them, I don't think you're quite ready to do this, but let's work together so that I can help you get to that level so that you can do it during our next service, or maybe next month in a service, something like that. So that was really the first takeaway that I think is really important for us to hear as chanters in America, that it's okay to hold yourself to a higher standard to preserve that spiritual worship atmosphere that is so important for us to cultivate as chanters. Now, the second thing that I thought was a really important takeaway for me was that we talked a lot about, as a chanter in America, you can only really do what you're empowered to do at your parish. And what do I mean by that? I mean that maybe at your parish, during Orthros, they want to get through Orthros quickly, and so they don't do any part of the canon. Well, if you want to do the canon, unfortunately, that's just how it is. You have to obey your priest, right? So you don't do the canon. But you can make the rest of Orthros beautiful, right? That doesn't mean that you can't put your everything into making what you can do beautiful. Or let's say you're working with a choir, and that choir only knows one tone. You can work on teaching them new tones, or you can work on just that tone with them. You can work on the music to make it as beautiful as you possibly can, right? I know something that I did at my church was that I told people that for choir, if they're not going to come to practices, then unfortunately they can't sing on Sundays. Because for me, it's very important that people come to practice and participate and learn the music together so that we sing with one voice during services. Of course, not everybody is going to have that opportunity. I'm very blessed to have a very supportive priest at my parish that allows me to do things like that. But you can only do what you're empowered to do. So do the things that you can do as well as you possibly can in order to maintain that spiritual atmosphere that I was talking about a bit ago, and really make the service as beautiful as you can for the faithful people who are there worshiping with you. And the third takeaway that I think was really important for me to leave this conference with, and something that I kind of knew going into it, but this really solidified it for me, was that chanting in America is very much in its infancy. We have so many different traditions in America, such as the polyphonic traditions, Western choirs. Back in the day, a lot of Greeks would set the music of the liturgy to 4-part harmonies, and that's how the liturgy was sung. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly valid way to sing the liturgy, of course, and a lot of parishes still do that. But those of us who prefer Byzantine chant, if we are to bring our chant, if we are to bring what we love as the liturgical music of the church, the tradition of the church, the Byzantine chant, to our parishes, some people might be kind of wary of that because it's not what they grew up with, right? And I think a lot of us have experienced that. And it's important to remember that we need to be patient. It's important to remember that a lot of people, it takes time for people to change. And it also is just something that we need to be humble about. We don't need to be forcing it in people's faces. And it's our job to show that Byzantine chant is really something that can make the services richer. It can make them more beautiful, right? Because a lot of people, it's not their fault that they are wary of Byzantine chant. They just haven't heard good chant. Here in the States, there's not that many churches that have really good chanters. And so it's our job to work on our craft, to make sure that we sound good, to make sure that we know the tones, to make sure that we are really confident up at the chant stand, so that when we do chant, we are showing the best of the tradition, right? And I think that just keeping that in mind is really, really important, because chanting is a new thing in America, and a lot of people are not used to it. So those are the takeaways that I had from my time at the Liturgical Arts Academy. I highly recommend anybody who is looking to get deeper into chant and wants that experience to go and spend a week there and to learn from these wonderful teachers. I had great experiences with John Boyer, Sam Heron, and Fotinidani Robinson. They were all wonderful teachers. They were all very helpful and willing, and you can tell that chant is really, really important to them. And so they're doing everything that they can to try and spread the tradition throughout the United States. So if you have any questions about either this or anything else that I mentioned in this video, of course, feel free to reach out to me at the email that's in the description below. Of course, if you want to schedule a lesson with me, you can also feel free to do that at the link in the description below. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.